I have. Hello, this is Jeff Krehmer, the author of Infinite Resources, and I'm with Roger Carlson, the author of Saving the World Before Breakfast, the series of three books. And today, or together, we're saving the world with infinite resources. Um, the date today is the 12th of January, 2025. And we'll look back at this time as the time that Los Angeles was burning. So, not
Hmm.
that that's a funny subject, but we have talked on this program several times about firefighting and how to protect communities from fires, and also about desalination of water. But I'm going to let Roger take the lead on this because his home is literally just 4 or 5 miles away from where the fires are burning. And I'll let you take it from there, Roger.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So we've got infinite resources from Jeff, and I'm saving the world before breakfast. Energy and resources come together, doing things right, which Los Angeles was not doing. Like Fort McMurray, they had a big fire in 2016, lost what, a good part of the houses for 100,000 people. But that was sort of a new thing for them. Los Angeles had fires like this for a long, long time. In fact, actually, I'll give the background on it is the settlers from Mexico came up, and then the more Anglo-speaking folks took over the place uh, later on, and the Indians had a system where they would burn in the spring. So there was a lot of smoke in the spring, but the Indians said, "Well, this keeps things right." Because we want some open space in the woods. We don't want to have such big fires. But the comment was, what do they know? They're ignorant savages. They haven't been here long. Maybe just 5, 10, maybe 15,000 years. They wouldn't know anything about it. Well, they forbid any burning, and then later on it became a new thing. So no burning, and also the land got drier. So eventually, hopefully by June, I want to say have a book, Embrace Fire and Water to save the world from the great drying. And that's the problem that's been happening. And getting us back to the Los Angeles area, the best way to describe how to do it right is see what was done wrong. And there's a 1962 short movie with uh, narration from was it Robert Conrad? I want to say Conrad. Anyway, yeah, wonderful narration, and they described a fire that happened in 1961, eerily similar to this year, where the Santa Ana winds, which are just a dry wind, comes down from the desert. It's a high desert, several thousand feet above us at the coast, and as it comes dropping down from the mountains, it gets compressed, it gets warmer, it gets drier, dries things out. And this year was one of the bigger ones, as it was in 1961. The Santa Ana wind came, some fire got burning, and the fire people could not stop it. It was they got everything that they had. They would try to hold the line. They would lose. They would retreat, make another line. In a period of 2 days, it went down to. Then there's Mandeville Canyon. It was one of the places. Brentwood was, I think, in other places. So the same places burned at that time. And they said, what happens is you can only get so much water that can go through the lines. So the thought was, well, maybe they should have had more tanks up above. This is 60, this fire was 1961. So we're talking 63 years ago. They didn't build more tanks. In fact, one big reservoir was emptied for maintenance, and that they emptied it in February of last year, and they still had not done the repairs. So that would have given them more water. There was 3 tanks that were like a million gallons, and they got, that was in one of the areas, special Palisades area. If they had more tanks, if they had more water in the reservoir, they could be doing things. And then other things, over a period of years, the resources were starved. They were cutting money from the fire department. This year there was 18 million down, but there was some previous. And when the COVID hit, a lot of the firefighters refused to get their injections. And so they were fired, speaking of fire. And after the thing got over, it could have been hired back, but they didn't do much work about that. So they're missing those people. And some excess equipment was given to help fight the war in Ukraine, which is a wonderful thing to do. But people in LA are being a little suspicious, say, hey, can we, what did they call excess equipment? So some of the important equipment might have been there.
From what I understand on that subject, the equipment that was sent was all obsolete and being replaced with newer equipment. So just like the other military equipment that's been sent is not up to NATO standards, like old Leopard tanks and things like that. So
yeah,
the old Abrams.
So they say, but yeah, we've come to doubt our government. Now, one thing that I will give the government a little slack was like, oh, why didn't you get the water from Northern California? And part of the reason is there's a fellow named Mulholland who helped build the California Aqueduct. But when he built the California Aqueduct, they took water from what was called Owens Lake. That area is now Owens Dry Lake Bed. And people in Northern California are afraid that if their water was taken for one time, it might stay in Los Angeles.
Right. That's so the same reason Canada doesn't want to sell water to the United States, because once we start selling it, it's not possible to turn off the taps.
Yeah. But on the other hand, there's a bunch of things where you could build more reservoirs or just build some small, in some of the places where it's draining down, they have areas to catch stones and such. We could keep some water in there. You could build more containment places for water, because there's enough water for agriculture and a bunch of things here, including firefighting, if you just have places to do that. And in 2014, there was a proposition for the voters. Can we take $1 billion to start building some more places? Some of that water that goes out to sea could be sucked into these reservoirs and it'll be there. In fact, I submit you have a number of just small, you line a lot of small reservoirs, and when you have extra time, you can pump into tanks, say up above places like Pasadena and Altadena that are in the mountains. So you'll have the water and you won't run out of it. And some people, let's see, what's hiding behind me? I've got about 3 books. This one, Steve Greenhut. There's another fellow, Ed Ring. This one is Winning the Water Wars. And these are a number of folks that argue that there's plenty of water most years. Like couple of years ago, we had what they call atmospheric rivers. It dropped a lot of water on the mountains,
Right.
which went out to sea. And so just collecting that water would be good. Reprocessing sewer water sounds awful, but the equipment can do the job. And
Yeah.
indeed, down
Uh,
in Orange, I believe it's in Orange County, where they are installing the equipment to do that. That gives you more water again.
Yeah, like I like to say, every molecule of water that we, or not every, but the vast majority of the molecules that we drink in any cup of coffee or whatever were once in the belly of some dinosaur. So it's like they managed to survive a long time, and they're
Mhm.
infinitely recyclable. So I just want to make a couple of points on what you said there. So
Go ahead.
in looking, I was watching some of the videos from the fire, and there's an awful lot of houses that have swimming pools in them.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, hasn't why don't people just do the most basic thing and put a sump pump in your swimming pool and have a sprinkler on your roof and try to at least minimize the damage that way? Because there's a lot of water that's represented just by
Mhm.
those swimming pools, right? So that's
There
one
is a fair
thing.
amount, and it has been done.
Okay.
In fact,
And
I've seen a number of videos where people on their own risking their lives, but they sometimes they save their house and maybe a house, one or two on either side, because they use the swimming pool.
yeah.
And a number of places, the fire crews said, like I said, we're actually using water from the swimming pool to try to put out the fire on
Oh,
the house down the hill.
right,
So,
exactly.
so it is being done.
Okay,
You're
so at least they're making
absolutely
use
right
of
on
that
that.
resource. The other thing that always amazes me about California is, I was visiting Carlsbad, and they
Mhm.
have one of the largest, well, one of the only desalination plants in
Mhm.
California down there. It provides about 10% of the water to San Diego County.
Mhm.
If you look at the state of Israel, they have created a surplus of fresh water using desalination techniques. So they have, of course, a natural amount of water that comes in, and then they've supplemented that to the
Mhm.
point where they're able to make the Sea of Galilee and uh, what's the river, the Jordan River that flows
Yeah.
from it, actually have more water than it used to. Now, then, of course, that gets drained off for irrigation and other projects. But the point is that they're providing more water to that system than historically was available. And I know that the environmentalists are really in California are really against having desalination plants because they say, well, it affects the ocean creatures and this sort of stuff when you have brine falling in the water. But if you could, produce, um, you know, I don't know, an extra 10% of the water that San Diego County uses, or do that 20 times. Obviously, that's like two times the amount of all the water that's used in San Diego County. Then
Mhm.
um, you would have a surplus of water available for fighting fires, for irrigation. And I know
Mhm.
that you were talking about in most years there's enough water for all of these things, but we know that the Colorado River has been in deficit for several years, and that's why
Mhm.
Lake Mead and other reservoirs are drying up. And also, we know, I think just this year, that a whole bunch of almond groves have been basically killed because they weren't irrigated because there just wasn't enough water for the system. And when you think about something like that, that's a multi-year investment just in the trees, not to mention the farmers not being able to make a livelihood from that space anymore. So, water is life. Why are people so opposed to this? This idea of getting water from the ocean, which is right there. I mean, California is has a huge coast. You could get an extreme amount of water from desalination, and then all those other projects that you were talking about, diverting water from the north and so forth.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of things that could be done. And basically, it costs more money, but how much money are they going to spend repairing parts of Los Angeles that have burned?
Yeah. Well, I
Because
think I've heard estimates that over $20 billion of damage has been
Mhm.
done by this fire. I mean, I don't know how much a water treatment plant costs, but you can amortize it over several years, and I'm pretty sure that you could build quite a few of them for $20 billion.
Yes, and that's of course that leads us to some other issues. First is it costs a little bit more money, maybe a significant amount of money to build a desalination plant. But again, if you have the water, then you can make a lot of things easier because as the essentially they're uh, guerrillas, political guerrillas saying, "Hey, stop this thing about getting more and more efficient in the cities because we're already fairly efficient. Just get more water, and then our our dishwashers, our clothes washers can can operate a lot better. Now they're trying to be so efficient. Frequently they break down. That so that's another expense of just not having enough water. So it's you spend the money. And another thing about money is make water a fungible thing. Whereas now it's kind of the right of discovery.
Mhm.
And as long as you use the water, you you can keep using it. Well, maybe if you say, all right, just make that a property value, just like mineral
Right,
rights that a lot
right.
of farmers and ranchers have. But they could say, hey, I could sell it because right now they frequently use pivot, and it's these giant, essentially rainbird sprinklers that are on giant wheels, and there's pipes going out. The line these pipes, and they go around a pivot point, go around and
Yeah.
around, and there's sending water. Well, that uses a whole lot of water because so much water in the air gets evaporated.
Mhm.
You could have drip irrigation, which is little pipes going below the surface of the ground, and that is so much more efficient. But right
Yeah.
now, if you have right of discovery, if you stop using that water, you no longer have the rights to it. You lose the
Right.
rights.
And so
So
that makes decisions like growing alfalfa, which is a very water intensive crop in the middle of a desert, so that you can keep your water rights. This is one of the issues that I've seen in a few documentaries. So, to your point, people don't want to lose their water rights, but if they could sell them, like that, or not sell them permanently, but like, sell them for a season or something like that, so they could maintain their water rights, but so the water could be used more judiciously, that would be one possible solution. Is that what you're saying?
I'd go further. I'd say you could sell it totally and you'd use less less water, but then it would be profitable to go with drip irrigation, which talk about Israel again
Yeah.
and a lot of other dry places. Drip irrigation is much more efficient in your water.
Yeah.
So that's
I,
another thing that gives millions of acre feet to. It's another one of those foreign country things.
yeah.
Use you might use cubic
And
kilometers. We use acre feet. One
yeah.
1 acre, that's a mile by or 640 acres, a square mile, and 1 foot of water.
Yeah.
That's how farm and ranch things and agriculture goes in the states.
Yeah.
But
It's a crazy amount of water when you think about it. So
if you
this
could buy
drip,
and sell water rights, that then you might have more efficient crops. Because I'll
yeah.
tell you another one: the a lot of Northern California grows rice in the lowlands. Well, they might, if water was had its true value, they might just go down to more. Actually, the almonds are not bad at all compared with rice.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can still you can have your almonds, and the rice can be grown in Mississippi, in Arkansas, places that have uh, twice as much rain, and it's more dependable. As somebody said, California doesn't really have average rainfall.
No.
It could be a desert one year, and it could be a deluge another year, and
Right.
the average is kind of in the middle. But it's like this year, gee, since about March, we've had a fraction of an inch.
Right.
In most places, the water comes in the spring. We have it in the fall and into the winter. But at a good year, the rains would have started in October, on into November, on into December. We had just fractions of it.
Yeah.
So
So
anyway, that's another place where you can get a lot more water. And again, actually, maybe go on the other side. Another worry is having too much water, the floods that they worry about. That's part of why we have concrete lined rivers going through the city and big levees out in agricultural areas. Uh, it'll cost you some land, but again, have some reservoirs so that you can have water for dry times.
yeah.
It's another thing that will get you where things going on. Add another one. Over millennia, people have drained swamps and things. In fact, there's a quote from Samuel Johnson. It's a wonderful thing. It was a book about how entertainment helped inventions. And Johnson was saying, you see some little toy, it doesn't seem to have any use. It's a little mechanical toy, but that mechanism eventually becomes something that can help drain the fens,
Hmm.
which were a major swampy area of kind of the eastern part of England. And it was one of the major uh, agricultural projects for decades that eventually turned that into a fertile land. But if you keep doing these things, the whole planet is getting dried out. Another thing makes them more susceptible to fires. You know about the fens of England. That was one.
Yeah.
One of the biggest lakes west of the Mississippi River was Lake Tulare in California, and it totally disappeared because of people would start tapping uh, small rivers and streams to irrigate their fields and get more
Yeah.
production. Well, that was great, except well, that was another dry place in what was the Soviet Union. It's now like the area of Tajikistan, uh,
Yeah.
Kyrgyzstan. They
A
had
couple of
a
those
couple other
stands. Yeah.
stands there. They got the Soviet Union needed foreign currency, so they pushed cotton raising, which is another crop that California has done in semi-desert. Well, that essentially drained a whole respectably large area of water that was called the Aral Sea. Well, now it's just a small part of what it was, and nasty, salty dust storms come off of that area. People have health problems.
Yeah,
Going back,
it's an alkali salt, and it's basically killed the surrounding area. It made it impossible to have any agriculture in that area. So you got what was once a moderate climate that had a complete, fishing industry, fishing boats, and all that sort of stuff. The boats are now, 50 kilometers from the nearest source of water, or water that could support them. They're just beached on the sand, and those communities all died away, and that whole economy was destroyed in exchange for irrigating these cotton fields, as you mentioned.
mm-hmm.
And I've heard some Russian people say, well, that was a deal that we chose to make, and I think we made the right decision. Now, ecologically speaking, I think they created a disaster. Now,
Mhm.
not just to point fingers at the Russians, we've got, I think the Great Salt Lake is about 1/3 of the volume that it used to be in the last 100 years as well, because it's been really dry for quite a few years now. And so we could see Salt Lake City, turning into a similar alkali uh, plain. It's kind of interesting. I went swimming in the Great Salt Lake once, and it was full of brine shrimp, and the water was like, we went out quite a distance and we couldn't get into any water that was deeper than about 1.5 feet. So swimming might be a bit of a misnomer there, but it was kind of an interesting
Mhm.
experience. So yeah, the water issues are they're global, and for the same reasons. We want to do
Mhm.
something productive and get a crop out of them, but we're not willing to consider, how much the songbirds that migrate through there are worth to the environment, or other ecological considerations. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Well, it was a
difficult
similar
problem.
thing for Lake Tulare. That was a great migration spot, which the birds don't get to use anymore,
Yeah,
except in a wet year.
yeah,
Again, uh, 2 and 3 years ago, there was heavy water, uh, rain and snowpack, and Lake Tulare came back. People were crying, desperate, sandbagging around their farm buildings, because of course, it wasn't like it was flowing fast. So when the water went down, their uh, their roads were still there for the most part. It's
mhm.
just they couldn't get to them for a while. Couldn't plant harvest for a year in the wettest spots.
So
So I
I
guess
got a crazy idea just kind of popped in my head now. Can you
okay, go for it.
imagine if along the West Coast you literally put mile upon mile of fountains just in the ocean, spraying water into the air, essentially to increase the evaporation rate, especially in the drier months? You think that something like that could potentially increase the snowpack and give you more water on a regular basis?
I think it's good to consider such stuff, but I would go with more more modest things. For instance, like people said, along the California aqueduct, it runs, what, I think like 150 miles or something like that, going to LA. If you put solar panels, which if people grumble, solar panels are expensive compared with some other support ways to get energy.
Yeah,
But along the way, if you have panels over there, it reduces the amount of evaporation.
right.
Likewise, Lake Mead and there are several big reservoirs along the Colorado River. There, there are areas that aren't necessarily used for recreation, fishing and whatnot. You can put panels there floating, or you can block off those areas and graze my favorite obscure plant, Azolla.
Right.
And Azolla is so fertile, it grows very fast and it locks up the whole surface. So that decreases evaporation again.
Yeah.
And you could use that as a crop. And that goes along the whole way. And that's the more exotic plant that we don't know. Now, another thing is people say the beavers.
Mhm.
That was a whole ecology, and people have been returning beavers. In fact, they're a pest on the East Coast because they were never totally trapped out, and they've rebounded. Now, a lot of the farms aren't used. Like, hey, the price of food has dropped, and the farmers just walk away from it. Anyway, beavers, there's enough of them near the houses. Yeah, they'll chew through all your rake handles and shovel handles, etc. And so they got too many beavers. They put them out in the west. in areas that were actually desert, a little stream going through. Over a period of time, there's a little woodland, especially willows and things, that keeps the water, and that causes more water to stay there. And of course, another thing, which has saved money, the Corps of Engineers in the United States, I forget what the Canadian equivalent is, probably does the same thing. The US Corps of Engineers straightened a lot of rivers and streams.
Yeah.
And that would help drain the water out in the spring, and it increased the farming area. That's by some small percentage. That's all well and good, but you're draining the water out to ocean, and you've got less water on shore. It's another thing that was getting rid of water, and suddenly, come August, you need it.
Yeah.
And so then you've got to come up with desperate things.
There was a farm, again, a documentary that I saw on YouTube, and I can't remember all the details about it, but essentially what they did was they just, in the river channel, they didn't have beavers, but they just chose to make tiny little dams, essentially to back up the water a little bit and prevent it from just completely running off the mountain. And they did this. They had basically a farm that had some hills around it, and they did this for all of the hills. And they turned it from an arid place to a lush green place within a matter of a few years, because they're able to retain that moisture. And of course, where the moisture is, things grow. One of the things I just decided to look up was the Santa Ana winds, and with reference to wildfires. So if you look up the Santa Ana winds, which I put in the chat here in Wikipedia. So I'm just going to read the wildfires. So major Santa Ana fueled fires prior to 2000 include the Santiago Canyon Fire, 1989, the Bel Air Fire, 1969, the Anaheim Fire, 1982, Laguna Fire, 1970, Laguna Fire, 1993, Kinaloa Fire, 1993. And then from 2000 to 19, we got the Cedar Fire, 2003, Old Fire, 2003, Esperanza Fire, 2006, Witch Creek Fire, 2007, October 2007, California Fires, T Fire, 2008, Sayre, Saure, I don't know how to pronounce that, Fire, 2008, the Freeway Complex Fire, 2008, the May 2014 San Diego County wildfires, December 2017 Southern California wildfires, and the Thomas Fire of 2018. From 2020 to present, we've had the El Dorado Fire in 2020, the Bobcat Fire of 2020, the Franklin Fire of 2024, and now the January 2025 Southern California fires. So this is clearly an issue that has been going on for a long time that we've been aware of. And California has got some of the best and brightest engineers in the world. To me, it's a failure of imagination that there hasn't been a solution to this problem.
Yeah, there's so many engineering things you could do. And the list of fires we've got is just the beginning. I think there's less and less things that got put on the internet as you go back in time. So it's like, well, we'll have it this year. Last year, that's extra money. So that bit of history is just a dusty part of the library. It's another worrisome thing that you might not keep track of it.
If the library survives the fire.
That's another one. Oh, wonderful library up in Altadena. One of the comments was, oh, we saw houses and banks and even a library. It might be a beautiful library that Altadena. They're unincorporated, but they have a library area in the county, and they fund their own stuff with book sales and resales and things. So hopefully they're all right. But meanwhile, other things in the past, Berkeley had a fire that hit an urban area, I think in maybe the 60s or so. I think they lost several hundred houses in that fire, and maybe a few people as well.
I think
So
Oakland and Sausalito also had major fires run through them, didn't they?
I don't know about the Sausalito one. I remember the Berkeley Hills.
Hmm.
Again, it's one of those things where, for my situation on the level ground, it's easier to fight the fires. That's one of the things that's helping. Although I'm up against a little hillside here,
Hmm.
but so I think yeah, Sausalito. Hey, it's got water on two sides.
Yeah, I know that maybe it wasn't Sausalito, but I'm pretty sure Oakland at one point had a major fire go through, and it was driven exactly the same way, not by Santa Ana winds, maybe, but some sort of wind. Do the Santa Anas go that far north?
Uh yeah, I'm pretty sure they do. There's a whole lot of places. I think they're called the Fawn winds in Europe,
Hmm.
because it's a similar process of uh, yearly winds that are warm and drying.
Yeah, so what causes the Santa Anas is when you have a high pressure system that's north, and so that causes a counterclockwise, or sorry, a clockwise flow, bringing dry air from the interior to the coast. And then
Mhm.
as it goes from the highlands to the lowlands, it dries out even more and warms up as it descends because
Yeah,
of, it gains pressure and stuff. So that,
and various hills or mountains in the way can cause the winds to bend one direction or another, and or cause them to be concentrated in some places. So in the
right,
passes, you can get uh, significantly higher winds, which is again, it can turn it into a blowtorch.
right. Yeah, where we live, we have a similar concept. It's called the Chinook wind. And so essentially British Columbia is a province that, except for a few valleys, is very lush and full of moisture. And what happens is you get all this moisture that comes in from the Pacific, and as it goes up the mountains, it drops a bunch of the rain and stuff. And as it
Mhm.
gets to the Continental Divide, that happens again. And so by dropping its moisture, like when you condense steam, you're heating the air. So it drops the moisture on the west side of the mountains for the most part. Then the warm air goes over the top of the mountain, and then as it comes down the other side, it dries out and gets warmer as it comes down the mountainside. And so those are the Chinook winds, essentially the same concept as the Santa Anas,
Yeah,
only we like the Chinook winds, especially in the wintertime. We're having a bit of a Chinook right now here. So it's January and we had above freezing temperatures, whereas the week before it was about minus 20 Celsius. So it's quite a difference in temperature in the space of a week, and that's because of this weather system.
yeah, that'd be
Possibly the same high pressure system that's giving you guys the Santa Anas is giving us the Chinooks.
yeah, could be. And those cells could be that big on the areas around there. Anyway, that's yeah. So like a refrigerator, the compression cycle makes the warmth to get it out, and then when it spreads out, the rarefaction, it gets colder. So the same process along the way,
Yeah.
and that's something you have to deal with. Oh, another, if you like your solar panels, and there is one thing, if and again, if you're willing to spend the money along those country roads, a line of solar panels with probably concrete posts, not wood,
Mhm.
and that would be another place where you'd have a lot more electricity and excess electricity, uh, 3 hours either side of noon, and that's where you could pay for the electricity to pump water up into these places,
Right.
because that's a major expense of getting water up there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people who are opposed to solar and they point out, well, solar is intermittent and all those sorts of things. The point is, just like you were explaining, if you have really inexpensive solar, and the price of solar has come down like to 1/4 of what it was a decade ago, as I
Hmm.
understand it. Um, so if the price of solar is that inexpensive, then you can start using the energy in those excess times for those kinds of projects where it's like you can do basically as a societal benefit to store water or desalinate water
Hmm.
or any number of things. And
Yeah.
the cost, the environmental cost is pretty minimal. And at this point, I think
Mhm.
from an economic point of view, solar panels are lasting at least 20 years these days. And it's not like they just die after 20 years. What happens is they just become less efficient
Hmm.
as the surface gets pitted from sand or whatever. Uh,
Hmm.
the So you can still keep them. If you have a solar installation that's been there 30 years, it might operate at half of the efficiency it did originally, but it's still producing power. So it's not like you have to tear it out and replace it.
Yeah. But once again, spend a little bit more and find things where if it's a cloudy week, you don't have to have it. But then it's a very sunny week that follows. You can pump water up, or hopefully or desalinate again. If you have reservoirs, tanks to put the desalinated water in, yeah, you can use this thing. It's just like the seasons. You have a wet season. Well, solar panels could give you a wet season of when you have a lot of sunlight, and again, you can have water to deal with these issues. And basically, it all comes back to if you pay for these things, you can get them done. And then organization wise, you got to stop making so much bureaucracy. In this thing in 2014, they had this proposition: $1 billion. We're ready to build more reservoirs to save water.
Yeah,
Not one has been built.
yeah.
In fact, we're losing ground. That was another thing that made people angry here. They just blew up the Klamath River dams and say, "Hey, we're getting more salmon." And other people said, "Yeah, but it says those striped bass are kind of a predator fish, and they're more dangerous to the salmon. That's on the Klamath, and then the uh, the smelt, Delta
Mhm.
smelt." And people think, and one of these they claimed it was cost about $1 million per uh, for I guess it was trout. It was either trout or salmon they wanted to save, and some of the guys that were working there said comes out to about $1 million of fish. If we just went to the grocery store, we could do a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I would take that estimate with a grain of salt, but it's kind of like when they were building the Panama Canal that we were talking about last week, and
Mhm.
and the guy said, "Yeah, I estimate that it costs $10,000 per mosquito you killed, or $10 per mosquito you killed," and the doctor said back, "Well, just imagine if you were bitten by one of those malaria-ridden mosquitoes." Would it be worth it to you then? And of course, the answer is yes. But now, to your point, if we've introduced these fish like the bass or whatever and already upset the apple cart in terms of ecology,
Mhm.
then we got two problems on our hands. Not only have we dammed the river, but we've got the whole life process cycle in that river basin is messed up. So yeah, the there are lots of difficult problems. So it's left to people like us and people who have some money and power to actually make the changes. But to your point about bureaucracy, nuclear power has come a long way in terms of the technology since the
Mhm.
1950s and 60s when they were building the nuclear plants. And it used to be, I think, originally it only took a couple of years from the time that the decision was made to go ahead and build a plant to
Mhm.
the time it was actually in production. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I've heard that it can be as long as 18 years from the time that somebody says we want to build a plant to actually getting the permitting and stuff in place to make it happen. And
Hmm.
that's just, and until I finally get it built, that's just way too long, and doesn't bode well for a lot of processes. In Canada, we've got the same thing, or in the States, when during the Second World War, when they needed a pipeline, they didn't. I mean, it was during war, so there was no environmental consideration. They just said we're going to build this pipeline, and that's that. And
Hmm.
we had in the 50s, people weren't opposed to projects like pipelines, at least not vocally or in large numbers. Now, of course, everybody
Hmm.
can have their own soapbox if they can get in front of a news camera or something and bang their drum for whatever cause they want to
Hmm.
support, and cause all sorts of problems and opposition to projects that can be demonstrated or are in the public interest to complete. So in Canada, we've had several pipelines be canceled because of public opposition, including the one to the States, the Keystone XL, but the Energy East
Hmm.
and Northern Gateway as well, which there was political interference with those too. So
Let's see. I know Keystone was going to Oklahoma and then on down to the Texas refinery row around Pasadena, California, and Beaumont and places like that. So the other one, what was it? The Northern.
Energy East and Northern Gateway. So what happened with Energy East was the 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 pipeline was basically nearing approval. There was opposition from vocal opponents in Quebec, but the new federal government, Justin Trudeau's first government, came into power, and they have an environment minister who was an activist, I think, with Greenpeace or one of the environmental groups, and he was actually arrested at one point for mischief for one of the projects that he was demonstrating at.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he's the minister of the environment, and so even though this project was set to be approved, um, the government said, no, 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 wait a minute. We're going to add a couple of uh, new steps to this process. We're going to have to do a carbon balance, and we're going to have to do a bunch of other things. And the company basically saw the writing on the wall. They saw that the new government was essentially opposed to expanding the fossil fuel industry, and wanted to do what they can to meet their Kyoto um, requirements, or Paris, whatever accord that we're talking
Yeah.
about. And it essentially, if the government can make a change at that late stage of the process, and
Hmm.
there's nothing to stop them from making another change, or there's no guarantee that you're going to actually get approved. And so the company TransCanada that was trying to build the pipeline had invested about $1 billion into it,
Well.
and that money, of course, was just written off. For the
Mm-hmm.
Northern Gateway, it was a pipeline from Alberta to British Columbia, central British Columbia. And what the federal government did in that case with the party that was elected in BC, also was opposed to the project on fundamental grounds, saying that, oh, well, if we have a tanker oil spill off the coast, it would destroy this, that, and the other things.
Hmm.
And so they basically created a tanker ban within so and so many miles of the coast of BC, for any tankers above. Basically, and it was allowed, you could run a small tanker, but nothing that would be economical to send over to Asia.
Mm.
Now, this is all ironic, of course, because there's tankers that are going from Alaska down to California all the time down the West Coast. And of course, there are tankers that are leaving from the Vancouver area, because there is a pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline there, that ships oil to Asia and stuff.
Hmm.
But it was purely political. And of course, the thing that they failed to mention is all the new regulations since the Exxon Valdez mean that tankers have to be double hulled. And,
Yeah.
you can have ships that are escorting them in and out of any treacherous areas, like tugboats and stuff. So it's the safest mode of transporting oil. I think it might be, well, safest mode. Is it safer than pipelines? I'm not sure, but they're about the same, and which is essentially very safe.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there have,
And if you're going to go trans-Pacific, the pipelines get a little bit sticky, although there are pipelines across the Baltic and North Sea.
yeah, and they have to watch out now with all these Russian ships that are dragging their anchors and cutting
Yeah.
cables and stuff like that.
Or whoever. It's a Riley Aces spies sort of thing of who blew up the pipeline coming from Russia.
Well, I think there's pretty good evidence that it was the Americans that did that.
Or actually, as somebody said, American money and some expertise might have gone to some Ukrainians who then did it,
Yeah,
which would give plausible deniability.
yeah. Well, I mean,
But it would still probably be the Americans because who
you
benefits? Cui
you can
bono.
give it plausible deniability, but Biden was on record as saying something along the lines of, "If you invade Ukraine, you can kiss your pipeline goodbye." I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said.
Mhm.
And 6 months later, that's exactly what happened after.
Yeah, or just Trump was against. You shouldn't buy. You should buy the gas from us.
Right.
And then Biden was saying the same thing, and then he said, "We're going to blow it up." That was, but anyway, yeah, back to the water. The more more modest things to do. Another thing is if you're going to do, it doesn't have to be burning the forest. You can cut down the timber and then replant. Now the gripe was frequently they plant one type of tree, so
Right.
it's a monoculture, and they plant them too close together. The
Yeah.
more trees you have, the more is water sucked up. So it wouldn't be as profitable, but every third tree is the kind of tree that uh, they would
Yeah.
be harvesting,
Yeah. Like,
and you'd have some open spaces that would stay as meadowland,
yeah.
and area where the fires would not move as fast.
Yeah. This is one
So
of the
along the way,
issues.
that would cut down the amount of water that the trees suck out, which is one of the problems. The trees are 2, 3, 4 times as dense now as they were in Indian times
Yeah.
because they just, anything that wants to grow grows there. It's not going to be, fires wouldn't take them out because immediately there'd be hotshot uh, paratroopers coming down with their shovels and
Yeah.
pickaxes, and they would keep it from burning.
Yeah.
So that's
There's
another
an
way to
excellent
keep more water.
an excellent TED talk on exactly that subject. And they show slides of, from about 100 years ago, pictures comparing that to today. And like you say, it's in some cases, it's less than a quarter of the amount of trees on the hillside. And that's because of the indigenous practice of regularly burning the forest for whatever purpose that they had in mind. But
Yeah,
it
deliberately
effectively,
or just allowing natural fires to burn.
right, yeah.
Mhm.
So it gets rid of the underbrush. And that's the same issue that we've had in Canada with the Jasper fire, the Fort Mac fire,
Mhm.
and all that stuff. Because for years we were thinking, well, Smokey the Bear said, let's put out all the fires and fight forest fires, whereas we need them to burn out the dead wood and stuff.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a really good TED talk. I recommend that for anyone to watch. And so that goes back to the forest management that we were discussing earlier. So
Yeah.
if
Got a reference for that TED talk?
oh yeah, I'll look it up as next time you're chatting here. But
Okay, yeah. Or email.
yeah, the if they would burn the sagebrush and stuff that you guys have got on the hillsides in California, like you said, in the springtime when there's not a danger of uh,
Mhm.
of wildfire, and just go and have prescribed burns, so they have breaks between where areas where there's lots of fuel and where
Mhm.
there isn't. Going back to the idea of producing excess water, of course, if you had enough water, you could keep those areas lush all the time. That's a lot of water, so that's
That'd be a
probably
lot of
not
water, but
practical anytime soon. But it's a thought. Because and also you were mentioning about the forest fires and replanting for economic purposes. This is one of the big issues that environmentalists have with the way that BC forests are managed. So they of course want to get in the trees that can be used for lumber or pulp and paper or whatever. And
hmm
so typically you're looking at spruces and those kinds of trees, Douglas fir. Um, but the trees that help prevent forest fires are the aspens because they build up this really big network. Their water, they store a lot of water inside of the plants themselves and in their root network. And there have been, I've seen pictures where, the entire forest is burned out, but you still got a stand of aspens that are there because they essentially don't burn. They've got so much moisture in their wood that they're not really susceptible to the fire. So
hmm
the natural, if you planted some aspens in between and stuff, that would also help to limit the amount of how much a forest burns. So you don't get complete destruction, but you still can have these patches of life
hmm
that can recolonize after a fire.
Yeah. And again, how to get it done. If the lumber companies get paid for some, they will thin the forest and do those things. They would complain. They really like to cut it all flat because it gets clear cut because you don't have to go around the trees and you
Yeah,
get the more in a small area, you get more trees. But if they could get enough to make a profit, they would be happy with it. And again, less water. If if there's less water being sucked out of the ground, there's more water back in the streams.
right.
And then along the way, while we're doing that, the permapre- uh, permaculture people, they swear by swales, which is just a fancy term for terrace, like a gentle terracing.
Mhm.
And so if the water comes comes down and again, instead of a straight stream, oh, you found it there. Oh,
Yeah,
Hesper, Paul Hesper. Yes, I've seen that too. Yeah, for people if you can't see the message on the site, the chat, it's yeah, https www. It's a TED talk, so yeah, TED.com talks Paul Hesburg, Hesburg, and he explains the things about controlled burns in this wet time of year, so that you can keep the forest from going to crown fires. I believe he's Oregon Forest Service, and he gives diagrams on the thing about things and the pictures about what this area looked like, and
exactly.
a lot of meadows and things, and the ground wasn't so much, and then boom, 50 years later, this is what it is, all one big sea of green. And similar, I've seen similar things for the Black Hills where Mount Rushmore is, some caves and a lot of historic things that I think it's like dog hair pines or something where they filled in meadow areas ready for big fires, and places further east that never had forest fires in historic times because when the colonists arrived, they chopped all the trees down. That was their lumber for cooking and heat in the winter, and that was crop areas. But now, after all the people warning we wouldn't have enough food, the price of food keeps dropping. So land just gets abandoned here
Oh
in
yeah.
Japan,
And
in the United States,
it,
and then it fills in with forests. So that's another
yeah.
place we'd like to get people, find some crops that you can get there. to,
Yeah.
and some lumber interspersed in there, some trees that you'd really like to build with, because that's another, you're going to be dealing. We're going back to the fire again, the fire and water. If you have some way to cut those trees down, so you'll still have your forest, but you won't have a forest so big and so full of slash and brush that's could ladder up the fires get to the crowns.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a lot of forests, dense forests, like you say. When the settlers came in, they cut down the forests, and now we're seeing a lot of regreening of the the eastern states and that sort of thing, with smaller
Mhm.
farms being basically shutting down and or just not being worked anymore because the prices don't make it economic. But we've also seen other disasters like Dutch elm disease, and I think there's a problem with chestnut trees too in the east, isn't it, where they're all dying off. And so the
Yeah, the
ecology
American
is
chestnuts
changing.
also got, I
Yeah,
forget what disease they had. Yeah, so American chestnuts, which were a regular crop of the American Indians.
yeah,
It was,
yeah. When I went to the TED site to look up this thing, right on the opening page, it says like one of the featured stories is "The Growing Megafire Crisis and How to Contain It" by George T. Whitesides, which was posted
there's
about a
another
year
one.
ago. And
Uh,
I mean, I haven't seen that one myself, but obviously this is again, you know, how to contain it from a year ago. Maybe
hmm.
at some point, some brave politician will say, you know what, let's invest the money in a system that's going to help prevent these fires from happening. Or maybe we change, I don't know, can we change the building codes and make the buildings out of concrete instead of wood? I don't know what it is.
They can do, yeah, there is another whole branch of things. The metal roofs on structures that have peaked roofs. That is a major thing. And another one is the uh, the vents into houses. You put a screen that's small enough mesh that keeps embers from being sucked into a house.
Right.
Because if you have embers hot enough to keep burning and they get your attic burning, your house is pretty much toast.
That's right.
That's another one. And I would say for hurricane places, like kind of armored shutters that you could close on your windows.
Yeah.
And for places in dry country, like say Western California, maybe lots of areas like Alberta, for you further north, those same shutters, you'd have something metal that would reflect heat, because the infrared going through a window, of course, the biggest one is a big sliding glass door.
Right.
There's something burning close to your house, the infrared there will set upholstery on fire.
Wow.
It's like
Yeah,
a heat ray in the War of the Worlds.
exactly. Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the companies I work with, I help to do the drawings for their basically transportable structures, the things that
Mhm.
you would use for building a mining camp or a oil um, drilling site or something like that. But
Mhm.
regularly they will have roll top shutters on the windows, mostly I think for insulation purposes in the winter when it gets really cold. So you have that extra barrier to prevent a lot of heat loss through the windows. But of course, it can also work as a fire barrier as well.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, metal on the outside to reflect, and non-flammable insulation in there.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a bunch of things, and that got a good start. And now the other person connected besides Hesburgh that was in the TED Talk. I got to look at that. I think he might have redone his Hesberg might have redone his TED Talk with
Oh, he's probably going to do another one after these fires.
yeah, because it's a similar thing. The brush outside of L.A., the chaparral, is it's not as big as the trees, but it's got more creosote in it. In fact, they're often called creosote bushes.
Right. Yes, I've heard of that. Yeah.
It just drips down on the ground. It's a defensive thing. Other plants can't grow there because there's this stuff there. And also, periodically, it burns. If it doesn't burn often enough, then the fires are bigger and hotter. Even though, yeah, they're not 100-foot trees; they're only 8 or 10 feet tall. But that creosote burns really good. Just like if you don't get your chimney cleared up after you've been burning wood, and it explodes someday.
So is that literally the same kind of creosote that they used to use to dip railway ties in to prevent them from rotting and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, and to keep insects out. And they did it for telephone poles for years.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that I don't see that anymore. I think they're going to have more bugs getting into
They stopped the practice because creosote is a carcinogen. So.
Oh, okay. Everything's illegal, immoral, fattening, or carcinogenic.
Yeah, I know I think California took things a little bit far with all the labeling that we get on our the products that end up here in Canada that also are sold in California, because it's like, then I put a little toy and it's got, some chemical in this product was determined to be carcinogenic or something like that.
Or my favorite is do not eat copier toner. I wasn't planning on having it for dinner anyway. Anyway, that's probably a good place to stop. And we've got a fair number of things.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's
the fire. Yeah, there's ways to make the houses a lot more fireproof.
Yeah. Well, I want you to be safe, and hopefully your home and your neighbors for many miles around will be safe from the further encroachment of the fires. I do think it's interesting that Canada and Mexico and many of the surrounding states have sent our firefighters down there to help, and water bombers and all that stuff. So I hope that's making a difference for you guys.
Yeah, I think it is. And this one might be where we did get a lesson from Fort McMurray. The Alberta government was a little slow to ask for help, whereas LA, hey, we're in trouble, help, and so there's been trucks coming from Oregon and Washington. I've got a cousin who helped load some trucks that are headed this way. So yeah, cross your fingers, we'll do all right. It's actually not one fire; it's several fires. One was they call the Palisades fire. It's an area along the coast where actors and directors and screenwriters live, very rich people.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that got people going. It's like, hey, we are your Democrats. You guys got to better support us.
Yeah, well, and here's one of the other interesting things is these natural disasters are becoming so costly now that insurance companies are thinking, well, we're just going to pull out of the state because there's no point in operating there. We can't make money anymore, and it's going to get to the point where the common person can't afford his insurance on his home anymore either. So
yeah, well, that's another thing with government, because the insurance company said we've got to raise the rates, and the state insurance board said, well, no, we just decided that you can't raise the rates anymore. And that's when the company said, well, if we can't raise the rates and we're going to lose money, we're not going to operate in California. So a number of companies, that's when they just pulled the plug and they said, I'm not going to be here. Or just like Elon Musk, the SpaceX guy, said that, and Tesla's. I think he's moved both he's moving both of his companies out of California, which
Well, at
is
least the
they
head
had,
offices and main thing, yeah, have been moved out. One of the interesting things, and I'll just bring this back for insurance because it's a different take on what you just were talking about. It's kind of interesting to see it from this perspective. So in Canada, each province has their own separate system for insurance. Similar, I
yeah.
guess.
Well, this province translates out as a state for us.
Yeah, right. And so British Columbia has ICBC, the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, and Alberta, being more conservative politically, has always had independent companies doing the insurance. And for years, ICBC was much more expensive to insure your car and stuff, or your home or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last few years in Alberta, we have now got the highest insurance rates in the country.
Hmm. They have a
And,
reason for that. They think.
well, I'm trying to think now. Um, it's not like we have any more car accidents than we used to. That number is pretty steady. It may have something to do with natural disasters like the Fort Mac fire and the Jasper fires. But so of course, the insurance companies have to pay out on those policies.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a whole community is burned, that's potentially billions of dollars. I think the Fort Mac fire was 9.5 billion or something like that.
Wow.
Um,
We'll exceed that, I'm pretty sure.
I've already heard estimates of more than 20 billion for the California fires. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it comes down to the question of if insurance companies start leaving the state like they are in California, and if the rates get to be so expensive that the banks require you to have home insurance, yet you can't afford it, does that mean you don't buy a house now? So
Mm-hmm.
that begs the question: does the state now step in and provide insurance because they're the only ones with pockets deep enough to actually do it?
Well, their pockets, will it's will a state or province have deep enough pockets for
Yeah.
insurance? Of
Well,
course.
and if you think about it, like in terms like for ICBC, for instance, they determine the state determines the building codes. They determine different rules and
Mhm.
regulations and stuff like that. So they can, they have also they're paying for the services, the fire departments and so forth. So to some extent, they can control the risk.
Mhm.
And so if you're doing that now, I'm not saying necessarily we need bigger government, but it may be that we might not have any other choice but to go that route. Certainly in Alberta, I resent that I'm paying as much as I am for home insurance and for auto insurance these days.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Well, ours, because yeah, we're also getting hit with that, and that is a question of what happens next.
Well, the same thing's happening, by the way, in Florida with hurricanes, and not only Florida, but any place where the hurricanes are hitting.
Yeah.
My cousin's house in Sarasota, or not Sarasota, in Bradenton, um, got hit twice in 2 weeks. I mean, this last year. I mean, that's just insane.
Mhm.
And of course, if the first one doesn't get you, the second one might, or if you didn't get flooded in the first one, the second one might have got you, or vice versa. So it
Mhm.
it it, it comes down to who can afford to pay for this, and if your insurance rates are going to double over a couple of years, does it make it even worthwhile to carry insurance? Just be self-insured. If your house is paid, at least you can do that.
Yeah. Hopefully that. Yeah. Hopefully that'll be. We could come to and say, well, we've got these design things on the house, like you were saying. Yeah, a concrete house has a lot going for it.
Right. And
Uh,
metal roof, right?
and a metal roof and so on, and say, so I should be safer. And or if they have the insurance company or quasi government or private, whatever it is, the insurance company would check things.
Yeah. One of my friends who's a firefighter, and I'm sure I mentioned this before, but he had this idea of essentially encasing an entire house under a cover, a reflective cover, and then filling that space between the house and the cover with foam, like just water foam that they use in firefighting. And I think there is a company that's actually doing that for, I don't know, X number of dollars. Or if you have the right insurance, they'll actually set you up with this. Now, the thing is, essentially what we're talking about here is an advanced tarp with a foam making system, and that's very inexpensive. Every home could literally have one of these things sitting in the garage or in the attic or something like that for easy deployment. And then when it comes time to evacuate, it's like, okay, well, we're going to spend 20 minutes and set this thing up, maybe an hour or whatever. And then we can leave, and our house should be here when we get back. Those are solutions that could be looked at too. And as far as I know, there is a company that's actually doing something like that now.
Oh, great. That would be another one if you get in that. Oh, like lest I forget, I'll click on the chat. So I have it. Zip.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, like you said, we've been at it for more than an hour, so this would be a good time to wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we covered a lot of the things, and so now I should organize it. And hey, that'll be a book. That's an important one because that is the most important. Actually, to finish up on it, global drying is worse than global warming because if you have enough water, it's okay. Like if New York got more warmth, it would, like 2 degrees warming average might make it like Florida.
Yeah.
Florida is a good thing. But if you don't have the water and it's hot as Florida, well, then you have the Sahara Desert.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that Al Gore mentioned in An Inconvenient Truth. He said, we're going to have hotter, drier spells, but at the same time, we're going to have more flooding and water damage. So it's kind of like, it almost sounds like an oxymorons, but the extremes are just getting bigger on both sides, right? So,
or he claimed that there would be more drying, but actually, if it was just getting warmer because of the carbon dioxide, we'd get more rain. So that would be much better for growing things.
Well,
what he wasn't following was this drying, which people were doing even before industry got big with a lot of carbon dioxide. So, yeah, Al Gore was talking about it, but he didn't know why it would be dry, or he just assumed it would be dry. But actually, it is getting drier because of all the things we've done. We turned the land of milk and honey. The children of Abraham came in and beat up the locals and took over. It was wetter and whatnot over a period of centuries.
Yeah,
it got drier. Libya was the granary of Rome.
Yeah,
and it got drier and became desert.
Yeah,
because
well, I don't remember exactly the way he said it, but it was something along the lines of it will get drier, and yet ironically we'll have more rainfall or something along those lines. But if you have rainfall over a dry, parched earth, then you just end up having the flash floods, and so the water doesn't absorb into the ground and stuff like it traditionally has.
Well, that's it. They don't have the data about storms will be more intense and such, and they always say, well, it'll be drier in some places, wetter in some places, and we're not going to tell you. Just worry about it. Like, well, no, that's part of the PR program.
Well, on the upside,
get drier because of what we've been doing. It's like, wait a minute, we've already been making it dry for centuries.
Yeah,
and that's more dangerous than getting warmer.
But on the upside for me here in Alberta, global warming will make the province more livable, and from the climate models I've seen, we'll also get more moisture. So,
all right, yeah,
we get the best of both worlds. So, it will be the land of milk and honey.
There you go. And Alaska might even be producing wheat. a lot of places, and that's why Arrhenius, one of the people that boosted the global warming thing, was he said, "This will be great. This will be good for northern countries like Sweden, where he came
Well,
from."
yeah, exactly. I find it ironic. Like, obviously, Russia isn't especially concerned with global warming. I find it ironic that Canada is one of the countries that's investing so heavily in things like carbon taxes and this sort of stuff, where to the point where we've been hurting our economy, even
Hmm.
though, in terms of cause and effect, we're probably going to benefit from global warming as opposed to it being a negative thing. So, of
Yeah,
course, having refugees come to us from around the world may not be the best thing because they're climate refugees, but we'll
yeah,
see.
it's terrible when you have a bunch of refugees coming up your southern border and saying things like "far out, gnarly."
Well,
Barf out, gag me with a spoon.
yeah,
The
we, we,
Californians are coming.
we might have to raise our tariffs until the illegal immigration stops.
I would say the government of Canada could raise a lot of money, and the United States would split the proceeds and have a cage match between Doug Ford and Donald Trump. And
Well, I
maybe
don't know
they
if the
could
Secret
have
Service would be up for that.
best of five, 3 out of 5 to win the contest, and they'd be in Toronto, uh, Vancouver, different cage matches.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to enjoy the life and make some money.
Well, Elon Musk and what the heck's his name, Zuckerberg, were talking about having a cage match at one point. Now that would have been a good money making scheme, but he might have ended up with somebody having more brain damage at the end of it. So
Yeah, well, yeah, that's just there was more talk than for both of those. But anyway, yeah, away from that, yeah, enjoy a little bit of warmer weather. We just have to have more water wherever it is. Even if it's
right.
cold, if you got moisture, you got like the northern forests and lakes, all those all those ducks and geese that come up because it's highly fertile for
Yeah,
those 6 months of sunshine because you got water.
yeah,
Now, Central Asia, around what was the Aral Sea, not so much because
not so
their
much. Yeah,
water is gone.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
so yeah, maybe that'd be a good place to stop. Just keep our let's be all wet. I got it. That's the only way to
yeah.
be.
I think in general, as long as you can control it and it's not causing floods, the more moisture, the better. So,
Yeah, exactly. All right, now we'll go away since we've had another 10 minutes of fun here.
all right.
You want to
Always a
set up for
pleasure,
next week
Roger.
again,
Yeah,
or take a
as
break?
far as I know, I don't have any conflict, so I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, sounds like a plan. All right, have a good evening.
Bye bye.